Flesh-Eating Aliens, The Purple People Eaters, Episode 4, Houston, Texas. Fred Hartman Bridge Hell, Chapter 1. Whispers in the water. The sun cast a shimmering glow over the Houston ship channel as vehicles streamed across the Fred Hartman Bridge. Its long suspension cables, gleaming against the backdrop of the Texas sky, seemed to hum softly as if holding secrets. Jenna Matthews, a local journalist, drove across the bridge, the rhythmic beat of the tires on the asphalt providing a momentary distraction from her harried thoughts. Her day had been busy, chasing stories of local elections and the new art installation downtown. Little did she know, her biggest story was yet to unfold. Suddenly, a splash from the water below caught her attention. Jenna glanced towards the source of the sound, and her blood ran cold. Emerging from the depths were sinuous, dark shapes, their shiny, scaled surfaces reflecting sunlight in eerie patterns. They were reminiscent of the tales she'd heard from Boston, of the malevolent creatures that had terrorized the city. A vehicle ahead swerved abruptly as one of the creatures lunged, wrapping its tentacle-like appendages around a man, yanking him from his car and into the water below. Chaos erupted. Cars collided, horns blared, and terrified screams pierced the air. In the ensuing panic, multiple vehicles were abandoned, their drivers and passengers fleeing for their lives. Jenna's journalistic instincts kicked in. She grabbed her phone, began recording, and narrated the unfolding horror. As she zoomed in on one of the creatures, its gaze met the camera, its eyes, cold, calculating, and eerily intelligent. The entire city seemed to resonate with panic. News of the attack on the Fred Hartman Bridge spread like wildfire. Radio stations interrupted their broadcasts with breaking news, TV stations dispatched helicopters, and soon, the skies above the bridge buzzed with a cacophony of rotors. In a makeshift command center, local authorities scrambled to respond. "Get everyone off that bridge now," bellowed Police Chief Rogers. "And get the Coast Guard on the line." Amid the chaos, a tall figure entered, his features hardened by recent battles with the unknown. Murray's arrival was met with a mix of relief and skepticism. "Murray, glad you could make it, but this is our city, our situation," Chief Rogers said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. Murray's eyes, though weary, sparkled with a fierce determination. "These creatures have left a trail from Jacksonville to Seattle to Boston, and now they're here. This isn't just Houston's problem anymore." A murmur passed through the command center. Many had heard of Murray's encounters with these beings. Some called him a hero. Others dismissed him as a lucky opportunist. But right now, Houston needed all the help it could get. As the sun set, casting the city into an ominous twilight, reports flowed in of amphibious attacks near the docks. The creatures were using the Houston ship channel to their advantage, attacking from both land and water. The military's involvement became palpable as tanks and armored vehicles rolled through the city streets, and fighter jets patrolled the skies. The intent was clear: protect the city, but also capture a live specimen. As night fell, a haunting stillness settled over Houston. The once bustling city now held its breath, waiting, listening for the whispers in the water. Chapter 2. Ripples of conspiracy. The Houston Police Department was abuzz with activity, yet an overwhelming sense of unease gripped the precinct. Desperate calls from panicked civilians filled the phone lines, creating an unnerving symphony of chaos. Inside a hastily constructed briefing room, Murray stood at the center of a tumultuous discussion, surrounded by a circle of skeptical authorities. "You might have had your successes elsewhere, but this is Houston. We handle our problems ourselves," challenged Deputy Chief Ramirez, a tall man with graying temples and a stern demeanor. Murray's piercing gaze met Ramirez's. "I respect that. But these creatures have terrorized 3 major cities. Believe me when I say, Houston isn't just another problem." The room was charged with tension, each side sizing the other up. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the entrance: "We've got a situation at the ship channel." As authorities scrambled to view the live feeds, the true scale of the creature's amphibious nature became dreadfully apparent. Emerging from the waters of the Houston Ship Channel were not only the familiar menacing figures but also a new, more aquatic variant, sleeker, faster, and with an almost serpentine agility. These new entities swiftly moved through the waters, attacking dockworkers, and taking down anyone unfortunate enough to be near the shoreline. Their coordinated strikes echoed a chilling intelligence, making it clear that these were no mere beasts but cunning predators. Early attempts by the local police to repel the creatures using gunfire and tasers were woefully inadequate. Their skins seemed thicker, more resistant, and the creatures' retaliation was swift and deadly. While the city grappled with the escalating situation, Murray met with a contact in a dimly lit bar downtown. Lena Martinez, an environmental scientist, had been studying the water's salinity levels after noticing unusual fluctuations. These creatures, Lena began, her voice low, are influenced by the water's salt content. High salinity makes them more aggressive but also more adaptable. She slid a file across the table. I believe they might be harnessing this environment to evolve. Murray, digesting the information, felt a cold realization. It's not just an attack. It's a breeding ground. As the days wore on, the situation grew increasingly dire. The military, which had maintained a vigilant watch, now actively patrolled the streets. Tanks and armed personnel carriers became common sights. Yet, beneath the surface, something more sinister was brewing. Rumors swirled that certain government agencies had prior knowledge of the creatures. Whispers of confidential files, top-secret experiments, and biowarfare programs spread through Houston like wildfire. While many dismissed these as conspiracy theories, for Murray, they held a ring of truth. He'd seen the lengths to which some would go for power and control. In a secret meeting with Dr. Lena, who had arrived from Boston to assist, Murray expressed his concerns. We need to find out if there's truth to these rumors. The creatures are one thing, but if there are forces within our own government working against us, that's a whole different beast. Dr. Lena nodded, pulling out a device from her bag. I've developed a frequency that seems to disrupt their communication. If we can amplify it, we might have a chance. As the chapter drew to a close, Houston's vast infrastructure, the lifeblood of its economy, stood at the brink of collapse. Refineries halted operations, pipelines were shut down, and the port was in lockdown. Yet, amidst the palpable fear, hope simmered. The city's resilience shone through as communities banded together, vowing to reclaim their home. But as night fell, casting long shadows over the metropolis, a greater challenge awaited. The ripples of conspiracy were spreading, and the waters of the ship channel whispered secrets of a looming storm. Chapter 3. Beneath the surface, rain battered the window panes of the Houston Environmental Sciences Building. Inside, the dim lighting provided an eerie atmosphere, but for Dr. Lee Matthews, an environmental scientist, the true source of unease lay in her findings. Working late into the night, she adjusted her microscope and examined a water sample from the ship channel. Its salinity levels were not just high, they were aberrant. Her previous hypothesis regarding the link between the creature's aggression and the water salinity levels was proving to be spot on. High salinity levels meant more aggressive and adaptable creatures. It was evolution on overdrive. Just as she was about to jot down her observations, a loud crash echoed through the lab. Startled, she looked up to see a shadow flit across the corridor outside her office. Taking a deep breath, she slowly approached the door, only to find her colleague, Mark, sprawled on the floor, his face a shade of ashen gray. They're in the tunnels," he stammered, gasping for breath. In the building's sub-basement ran a series of old drainage tunnels which connected to the ship channel. They had been long sealed off, but if the creatures had found a way in, the entire facility was at risk. The pair hurriedly moved to the security room, locking themselves in. Multiple screens showcased the unfolding horror. Creatures, now including the newly evolved amphibious variants, were swiftly navigating the tunnels. Their movement, both fluid and purposeful, hinted at an underlying strategy. Meanwhile, the vast sprawling infrastructure of Houston was under direct threat. News reports flashed images of creatures launching surprise attacks from drainage outlets, sewer systems, and even water supplies. Panic spread like wildfire. Houston was not just under siege from above but from beneath as well. It wasn't long before the military rolled into action, with armored vehicles, choppers, and heavily armed squads moving in precision. The initial impression was one of a rescue mission. But as they started rounding up the creatures, it became evident their interests were twofold. Not only did they intend to neutralize the threat, but they were also capturing specimens, alive. Murray, watching the operation unfold from a distance, felt a twinge of suspicion. His earlier concerns about the government's hidden agenda seemed to be manifesting right before his eyes. He decided to dig deeper and approached a soldier, Sergeant Daniels, an old acquaintance from Jacksonville. "You guys seem well prepared," Murray remarked, making light conversation before broaching the subject. "You wouldn't happen to be catching these things for research, would you?" Sergeant Daniels looked around nervously before leaning in. "It's above my pay grade," he whispered, "but there's talk. Word is they want a live one, to study, maybe weaponize." Murray's heart sank. It wasn't just about defense. There were ulterior motives at play. In the midst of this, Dr. Matthews decided to share her findings with Murray, having heard of his involvement in the previous city attacks. She called him to her lab, which, for the moment, was secured from the creatures. "The water's salt levels are unnaturally high, and I believe it's directly influencing the creatures," she explained, showing him her research. Murray absorbed the information, connecting the dots. "We need to alter the salinity, make the waters inhospitable for them." Dr. Matthews nodded. "It's a start, but with the creatures already on land and evolving rapidly, it's only a temporary solution." While the two brainstormed, a sudden tremor shook the building. Overhead lights flickered, and alarms blared. The creatures had breached the facility. A security announcement urged everyone to evacuate. Dr. Matthews and Murray scrambled, making their way through corridors filled with terror. Their path was fraught with close encounters, but together they managed to navigate to the exit. Outside, Houston was transformed. The once bustling city was now a theater of war, with military personnel engaging the creatures at every corner. The skies echoed with the roars of combat, and the ground trembled under the weight of the conflict. Amidst the chaos, Murray and Dr. Matthews sought refuge in an abandoned building. The weight of their findings, combined with the realization of the military's intentions, bore heavily on them. They knew they had to act fast. As the chapter concluded, the fight for Houston intensified, laying the foundation for battles yet to come. Beneath the city's surface, secrets lurked, and the lines between friend and foe were becoming increasingly blurred. Chapter 4. Frequency of Fear. The piercing sound of Murray's phone broke through the silence of the night. The ID flashed Dr. Lena's name. He immediately picked up, knowing that any information she had could be pivotal. "Evolution," she started without preamble, her voice echoing the urgency of the situation. "It's happening faster than any of us predicted. The creatures are adapting, Murray. They're learning. They're evolving." The implications of her words hung heavily between them. Murray replied, "I've observed this. The amphibious nature, the rapid intelligence. What's the solution?" Dr. Lena hesitated, and then confessed, "There's no guaranteed solution, but I've been working on something. It's experimental." A little later, under the dim glow of streetlights, Murray met Dr. Lena in a secluded area. She unveiled a complex-looking machine, small yet intricate, pulsing softly with a blue hue. "It's a sonic emitter," she explained. "I've been studying the creatures' behaviors. They respond to certain frequencies. While most frequencies seem to agitate or attract them, there is one particular frequency that appears to repel them. It's their proverbial kryptonite." Murray looked at the device in awe, realizing the potential of such a weapon. "We need to test it," he urged. The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. A frantic radio message alerted them to another imminent attack near a pipeline facility. If the creatures breached it, the damage would be catastrophic. Arriving at the scene, the duo saw the creatures amassing. Murray powered on the sonic emitter. A pulsating hum, inaudible to human ears but devastating to the creatures, radiated from the device. Almost immediately, the effects were visible. The creatures recoiled, their grotesque forms writhing in apparent pain, before they began to retreat. The humans on site cheered, their first taste of hope in what had seemed a losing battle. Despite their success, Dr. Lena wore a troubled expression. "It worked this time," she said, "but these creatures evolve. They adapt. How long before this frequency is no longer effective?" Murray nodded in agreement. "It's a temporary reprieve. But it gives us time to understand them better, to find a more permanent solution." Back at the makeshift base, Dr. Lena, with Murray's assistance, set to enhance the device. Their plan was to create multiple frequencies, continually switching, to confuse and deter the creatures. News of the successful repelling spread like wildfire. Military units were now eager to equip themselves with these sonic emitters. Production began on a larger scale, and soon, many key areas of Houston had these devices installed. However, this success was not without its complications. Government officials, noting the effectiveness of the sonic weapons, became even more interested in capturing and weaponizing the creatures. Their earlier conspiracy, suspected by Murray, was proving true. Bio-warfare was on their agenda. Days turned into a tense standoff. With each sonic repelling, the creatures grew more strategic. They started to avoid areas with emitters, focusing on more vulnerable targets. Their patterns changed, hinting at a rapidly developing intelligence. In one such instance, a large group of creatures ambushed a military convoy, yanking soldiers out with terrifying speed. The creatures seemed to have identified the threat the military posed. They were learning, strategizing. As Murray and Dr. Lena studied the creatures' behaviors, they noticed something alarming. A few creatures were seen to be unaffected by certain frequencies. It was as if they were developing a resistance. The evolution they had feared was happening. Murray voiced his concern: "If they become entirely immune to our frequencies, we're back to square one." Dr. Lena nodded. "We need to diversify our strategy. The frequency is a deterrent, not a solution." A brainstorming session ensued. The duo realized that while the sonic devices kept the creatures at bay, they needed a more direct way to neutralize them. Drawing from their past encounters in Jacksonville, Seattle, and Boston, they looked for patterns, weaknesses. Their memories brought them back to an instance in Seattle when a creature had reacted violently to a chemical compound. What if we could introduce a substance into their environment, something they can't adapt to? Dr. Lena pondered. The two embarked on rigorous research, with Murray delving into past data while Dr. Lena experimented with various compounds. Their efforts led to a discovery, a particular pheromone that the creatures seemed to abhor. Integrating this with the sonic devices could provide a twofold defense mechanism. As days progressed, the city of Houston turned into a battlefield of wits and evolution. Each side adapting, countering, and strategizing. The humans, with their newfound weapons, started reclaiming parts of the city, setting the stage for a massive showdown. Murray, always at the heart of the action, felt the weight of humanity's survival on his shoulders. As the chapter drew to a close, the looming battle promised to be not just of might but of intellect, evolution, and the sheer will to survive. The stage was set for the climactic battle on the Fred Hartman Bridge. But as with any war, uncertainties loomed large. Would they be ready for what awaited them? Chapter 5. Tidal turmoil. The vast expanse of Houston's ship channel was a restless, undulating mass, darkened by the night, yet still glittering with the distant lights of refineries. In its midst, a smaller ripple was spreading, leading to the ominous silhouette of the Fred Hartman Bridge. Below the waterline, something moved, a nightmare from the depths, its purplish hue standing out starkly against the dark waters. The creature, having evolved remarkably fast into its amphibious form, was headed toward one of Houston's largest refineries. On the bridge, a convoy of military vehicles screeched to a halt. The leading jeep's doors opened, revealing General Ashcroft, his expression grim. He'd captured a live specimen. Encased in a reinforced tank with multiple layers of clear ballistic glass, the captured creature squirmed, emitting a low, haunting howl that made even the bravest soldiers shift uncomfortably. Murray watched from a distance, his instincts screaming that there was more to this capture than met the eye. Dr. Lena stood beside him, her concern evident. "They're not just capturing it for study, are they?" she whispered. Murray shook his head, his gaze never leaving the tank. "It's too calculated, too showy. They have other plans." Having spent days gathering intelligence, Murray had pinpointed a secret military facility in Houston's outskirts. There were whispers of bio-warfare plans, of attempts to weaponize the creatures. Tonight, he'd confirm those suspicions. Covered by the darkness of night, Murray began his infiltration. Ducking under surveillance cameras and avoiding patrolling guards, he made his way to the central building. The faint hum of machines grew louder, and soon he was staring at a massive underground lab. In the center, the captured specimen writhed, connected to various tubes and wires. Scientists scurried around, their faces masks of cold detachment. On a large table nearby, plans were spread out, detailing weaponization strategies. It was clear the military hoped to harness the creature's abilities for warfare. His heart pounding, Murray took pictures as evidence. His exit, however, wasn't as stealthy. Alarms blared, echoing ominously through the facility. Murray sprinted, evading guards, and managed a narrow escape into the woods outside. Meanwhile, Houston's refineries faced an imminent threat. The creatures, displaying a cunning never seen before, had sabotaged key pipelines, causing a domino effect of malfunctions across the city's energy infrastructure. Massive flares illuminated the night as refineries tried to burn off excess gases, casting an eerie, flickering glow over Houston. The city was on edge. Between the military's covert operations and the creature's strategic assaults, hope was dwindling. Murray and Dr. Lena knew they had to act fast. They convened a secret council, gathering the best minds they could find: engineers, scientists, and strategists. Their mission? To devise a large-scale counter-operation against both the creatures and the military's ulterior motives. Using the photos Murray had taken, Dr. Lena detailed the military's bio-warfare plans. The room filled with hushed murmurs, the gravity of the situation dawning upon everyone. The meeting, however, was cut short by a sudden tremor. The creatures had launched a massive assault, their numbers overwhelming, their intent clear. They were here to reclaim their captured comrade. The city's defenses buckled under their onslaught. But Houston wasn't going down without a fight. From rooftops, snipers took aim, their bullets laced with the pheromones Dr. Lena had discovered. On the ground, sonic emitters blared, creating a cacophony that left the creatures disoriented. Soldiers, equipped with advanced weaponry, pushed back, their determination unyielding. The battle raged on, the tide constantly shifting. Just when it seemed the humans had gained an advantage, the creatures would regroup and retaliate with newfound ferocity. Amidst this chaos, Murray and Dr. Lena saw their chance. They sped towards the military facility, hoping to free the captured specimen and end the creature's relentless assault. The facility was heavily guarded, but the ongoing citywide battle had thinned its defenses. Breaking in, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors until they reached the central lab. The creature, still trapped, let out a haunting cry upon seeing them. Using a modified frequency emitter, Dr. Lena managed to calm the creature, making it docile. With the creature in tow, they made their way out, pursued by guards and alarms. Reaching the surface, they released the creature. It paused, glancing at them momentarily, its intentions unreadable, before diving into the ship channel and disappearing. As dawn broke, the intensity of the battle waned. With their captured member returned, the creatures retreated. Houston, battered and bruised, had held its ground. However, the ordeal wasn't over. The creatures were still out there, their numbers vast, their next move unpredictable. As the city began its slow journey to recovery, Murray and Dr. Lena knew that the war was far from over. On a distant horizon, the iconic silhouette of Alcatraz Island loomed, holding the promise of another confrontation, another battleground. The fight for Earth's survival was only just beginning. Chapter 6. Baiting the bridge. The Fred Hartman Bridge was a marvel, stretching its steel tendrils across the Houston Ship Channel. But tonight, it was not just an engineering masterpiece, it was humanity's last stand. The city was buzzing with anticipation. As dawn broke, the bridge transformed into a fortified arena. Military personnel, scientists, and civilians alike worked tirelessly, setting up barricades, defense posts, and advanced sonic devices that Dr. Lena had designed to repel the creatures. Murray oversaw operations with a hawk-eyed precision. He coordinated between the military, the local police, and the various engineers and scientists who had been roped in to assist. His once skeptic attitude towards Murray had morphed into profound respect. There was a palpable tension in the air. Even as families were evacuated to safer zones, volunteers poured in, offering their help in any form, from acting as spotters to providing refreshments. The people of Houston, despite their fear, were united in their defiance. At the heart of the operation was the bait, a massive floodlight set up on the central span of the bridge. Its lights would shine so brightly, it would be visible from miles away, both from the air and below the surface of the water. The idea was simple yet perilous. Draw the creatures out, right into the heart of their trap. Dr. Lena's lab had become the central command post. Inside, she and her team were calibrating the unique frequency device, ensuring that its reach was optimal. Murray popped in, checking on the progress. "We only get one shot at this, Lena," he reminded her. She nodded, her eyes tired but resolute. "We're ready." As dusk approached, the floodlights activated, piercing the evening sky with their intense luminescence. All other lights in the city were dimmed, making the bridge the singular beacon in the vast darkness. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Every eye was trained on the waters below and the skies above, waiting for the first sign of the creatures. Hours ticked by. The eerie quiet was punctuated only by the occasional radio chatter and the hum of the floodlights. Then, a cry rang out from one of the spotters. "Movement below. They're coming." Silhouettes of the amphibious creatures emerged from the waters, drawn to the blinding light. As they drew closer to the bridge, Dr. Lena activated her device. A high-pitched frequency, barely audible to the human ear but devastating to the creatures, reverberated through the night. The creatures hesitated, their advance stymied. The military sprang into action. Artillery fire rained down on the water, causing massive splashes and taking out several creatures. But for every one that fell, 10 more seemed to emerge, undeterred by the initial confusion. Murray, atop one of the bridge's towers, used binoculars to assess the situation. He realized that while many creatures were deterred by the frequency, some, maybe the younger or more evolved ones, were adapting. He radioed down to Dr. Lena. "We need to modify the frequency, now." Lena, beads of sweat forming on her brow, recalibrated the device. With each tweak, the creatures' reactions varied, some retreated, while others became more aggressive. On the bridge, volunteers and military personnel fought bravely, using every weapon in their arsenal. Early victories, as creature after creature fell to their defenses, buoyed their spirits. But as the night wore on, fatigue began to set in. The creatures' relentless assault, coupled with their surprising adaptability, began to wear down the human defenses. A particularly large creature, its skin an even deeper shade of purple, leapt onto the bridge, wreaking havoc. Soldiers fired at it, but it seemed impervious to their bullets. Just as it was about to lunge at a group of volunteers, a massive explosion threw it off the bridge. Murray, having fired a rocket launcher, gave a brief nod of satisfaction. The tide of the battle seemed to shift continually. Every time the humans thought they had the upper hand, the creatures would regroup and launch a renewed assault. But Houston's defenders were resilient, pushing back wave after wave. As dawn approached, the frequency device, having undergone multiple recalibrations, found a pitch that seemed to deter the majority of the creatures. One by one, they began to retreat, disappearing into the depths from whence they came. The sun's first rays painted the sky with shades of pink and gold. The Fred Hartman Bridge, scarred and partially damaged, still stood tall. The weary defenders, though battered, celebrated their hard-fought victory. Murray and Dr. Lena, standing side by side, looked out over the water. The city had united in its defense and had emerged victorious, but both knew that this was just one battle in a larger war. In the distance, the silhouettes of the retreating creatures could be seen. And as Murray looked closer, he noticed that they were headed in a distinct direction, moving with purpose. "Alcatraz," he whispered. Dr. Lena nodded. "The battle for Earth is far from over." As the city began its recovery, preparations for the next showdown were already underway. The battleground had shifted, but the resolve of the human spirit remained unbroken. The war for survival raged on. Chapter 7. Echoes of evolution. Dawn's tender light kissed the edges of the horizon as the battle-worn defenders of Houston regrouped. The initial wave of creatures seemed to have been repelled. The Fred Hartman Bridge, though scarred, was a testament to human resilience. But there was little time for rest. Reports from the outskirts of the city began filtering in. The creatures were no longer just assaulting the bridge. They were hitting multiple points along Houston's vast network of pipelines and refineries. And they were evolving, manifesting abilities none had seen before. At a refinery near the ship channel, the creatures seemed to release a high-pitched scream that shattered glass and incapacitated workers. They had become more coordinated in their attacks, indicating some form of communication or shared consciousness. Murray, Dr. Lena, and a team of elite soldiers raced to the scene. Approaching the refinery, they witnessed a ghastly spectacle. Creatures not only pulling workers into the depths but also secreting a substance that seemed to dissolve pipelines, causing catastrophic leaks. The environmental scientist who had earlier identified the effects of salinity on the creatures surmised that these new abilities were also a result of evolutionary adaptations, perhaps spurred by the environment or even human countermeasures. Murray was on the front line, directing soldiers and using his own formidable combat skills. As he brought down creature after creature, he caught sight of a high-ranking military officer, General Walters, overseeing the capture of one of the creatures. Walters' intent was clear. The military's interest wasn't purely defensive. They saw potential in these creatures, weapons of mass destruction, bio-warfare agents, or worse. Murray's suspicions were further heightened when he noticed several scientists, not from Dr. Lena's team, collecting samples and data from downed creatures. The battle raged on, the blazes from the refineries painting the sky orange. Dr. Lena and her team worked tirelessly, adapting their sonic device to counteract the creature's new abilities. But every time they thought they had found the perfect frequency, the creatures would adapt. The devastation was immense. While many creatures were felled, the city's infrastructure suffered significant damage. Refineries exploded, pipelines leaked, and the port was in chaos. Amid the turmoil, Murray was approached by a whistleblower, a young military scientist named Dr. Erica Hayes. She confirmed Murray's worst fears. There was a faction within the government that wanted to harness the creatures for warfare. The research had started even before the attacks, based on information from a mysterious extraterrestrial signal intercepted years ago. As Murray processed this revelation, the battle took a turn for the worse. The creatures, with their new abilities, began overpowering the human defenses. The military, torn between fighting off the creatures and capturing them, faltered. Murray, realizing that a divided focus would be their downfall, made a drastic decision. He confronted General Walters publicly, revealing the military's covert intentions. The revelation caused an uproar among the soldiers and civilians alike. They felt betrayed. Walters, cornered, admitted to the covert operations but argued that it was for the greater good of the nation. But his words fell on deaf ears. The unity of the defenders was compromised. Murray took charge. He rallied the troops, reminding them of the immediate threat. "We can settle our differences later. Right now, our city, our families, are at stake." The battle resumed with renewed vigor. Dr. Lena's device, further modified by integrating some of the covert research data that Dr. Hayes provided, began showing results. The creatures were pushed back, their numbers dwindling. But victory came at a high price. Much of Houston's infrastructure was damaged, and many lives were lost. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the battle-scarred city, Murray, Dr. Lena, and the remaining defenders took a moment to mourn and reflect. The creatures' retreat was temporary. Their migration towards Alcatraz Island was now even more critical, as the stakes had risen. With the military's ulterior motives exposed and the creatures evolving faster than ever, the war was far from over. And Murray knew that the next battleground, Alcatraz, would test the limits of humanity's resilience and ingenuity. The echoes of evolution were loud and clear, signaling an upcoming storm of epic proportions. Chapter 8. Nightmare Nexus. Darkness engulfed the city as Houston braced for the climax of this relentless nightmare. Flashes of orange and blue from emergency lights flickered over the Fred Hartman Bridge, silhouetting the creatures that lurked in the waters below. The bridge, the nexus of the city's survival, was also its most vulnerable point. Murray stood alongside Dr. Lena, both perched on an elevated platform. Around them, soldiers, local police, and brave civilians were in their positions, weapons at the ready. All eyes were on the looming bridge, the atmosphere thick with palpable tension. "We've been through Jacksonville, Seattle, Boston. Each time, they've adapted, evolved," Murray murmured, eyes never leaving the horizon. Dr. Lena nodded, clutching the remote to her frequency device. "But so have we," she replied with steely determination. The plan was clear. Lure the creatures onto the bridge with the unique frequency Dr. Lena had developed, while simultaneously detonating controlled explosions at key points along the Houston ship channel, cutting off their escape routes. It was risky, but it was the only way to keep the monsters away from the vital refineries, pipelines, and ports. As the first haunting notes of Dr. Lena's frequency echoed across the water, an eerie stillness settled. Everyone held their breath. And then, with a savage, furious energy, the creatures emerged. First one, then dozens, their purple forms glistening under the artificial lights. The battle was fierce. Every inch gained by the creatures was contested by bullets, explosives, and the desperate might of Houston's defenders. The soldiers, showing impeccable discipline, held their lines even as the creatures tried to flank them. But the creatures were no longer just predators hunting for food. They exhibited a tactical awareness, a collective intelligence that made them even more formidable. Amidst the chaos, several brave souls stood out. Rosa, a local policewoman, fought tooth and nail, saving countless civilians. An elderly man, Mr. Peters, used his vast knowledge of the city's underground sewage systems to guide groups to safety. Heroes emerged from every corner, their stories woven into the fabric of Houston's legacy. But the creatures were relentless. With every wave repelled, another would take its place. The defenders were tiring, ammunition running low. They needed to enact the final phase of their plan. In the heart of the battle, Murray made a fateful decision. With a heavy heart, he gave the order to blow the sections of the bridge. It was a drastic move, one that would cut off major access points of the city, but it was the only way to stop the onslaught. The series of deafening booms that followed sent shockwaves through the city, both literal and metaphorical. The bridge, partially destroyed, became an insurmountable barrier for the creatures. Those on it were trapped, making them easy targets for the defenders. The explosions in the ship channel further confused and disoriented the creatures, breaking their coordinated assaults. Hours seemed like minutes, and as dawn approached, the tide began to turn. Exhausted, battered, but not broken, the defenders of Houston began pushing the creatures back, their combined efforts proving too much for the alien menace. But victories in war often come at a high price. As the sun broke over the horizon, illuminating the devastation, the cost became apparent. The once majestic bridge lay in ruins. Parts of the city were on fire, and the death toll was staggering. Murray, covered in grime and sweat, his face etched with grief, stood overlooking the scene. Dr. Lena approached him, her own face a mask of sorrow. "We did it, Murray." "But at what cost?" Murray, ever the stoic, nodded. "We've protected our home, Lena. But we've lost so much." The two stood in silence, absorbing the weight of their choices. The creatures had retreated, but Houston was forever changed. News soon spread of their victory, but it was bittersweet. The city would rebuild, scars serving as a reminder of the night they faced the abyss and emerged triumphant. But for Murray and Dr. Lena, the fight wasn't over. They had received word. The creatures were on the move again, heading towards Alcatraz Island. As they prepared to chase this new lead, they knew the war was far from over. The creatures would be back, perhaps stronger, smarter, and more evolved. But so would humanity. Resilient, united, and ready to face any challenge thrown their way. The legacy of the Nightmare Nexus would live on, not as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to human spirit, sacrifice, and the indomitable will to survive. Chapter 9. Sorrowful sunrise. Houston awoke to a morning stained with grief. The rising sun painted the scarred skyline in hues of gold and orange, but beneath this ethereal glow lay a city in mourning. Everywhere, flags hung at half-mast, while impromptu memorials sprouted at every corner, adorned with flowers, candles, and photographs of the missing. Though the previous night's victory over the creatures on the Fred Hartman Bridge was undeniably heroic, the city's heart ached. The human cost of the battle had been steep, and for many, the war was personal. Families torn apart, friends vanished. Every Houstonian had lost someone. Murray stood amidst the rubble, lost in thought. The skeletal remains of the bridge in the distance stood as a haunting testament to the night's events. The once bustling artery of the city was now silent, its life force drained by the horrors it had witnessed. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Dr. Lena. Her usually sharp eyes were dulled by exhaustion and sadness. "Look at this, Murray." She handed him a small device that displayed fluctuating readings. "These are the salinity levels from the ship channel. They've been tampered with. Our environmental scientist found evidence of manual intervention. Someone wanted those creatures here, more aggressive and adaptable." Murray clenched his fists. The deep-rooted conspiracy he had begun to unearth was now revealing its tentacles, and they spread far and wide. "We suspected someone within the government was aware of these creatures. But to think they would manipulate the environment, and in turn, the behavior of these beings." Dr. Lena nodded grimly. "Biowarfare, using these creatures as weapons, perhaps? Or a tool to gain power and control?" Amid the sorrow, anger bubbled up within Murray. He was determined to expose those who had endangered countless lives. They had a lot of ground to cover. Starting with the military's involvement, they needed to trace every lead, every indication of who knew about the creatures and how deep the treachery ran. However, the urgency of another issue pulled at him. The creatures' migration. Reports were pouring in of peculiar activity off the coast of San Francisco, particularly around Alcatraz Island. The creatures were on the move, adapting yet again, and finding new hunting grounds. "We need to warn them," Dr. Lena said, echoing Murray's thoughts. "I'm heading there," Murray decided, determination lacing his voice. "But Lena, I need you here, to continue the research. We need to find out how to end this, once and for all." Dr. Lena looked conflicted but nodded. "You're right. But promise me you'll be careful." Murray offered a reassuring smile. "Always am." As he made his way towards a makeshift helipad, Murray's mind raced. The thought that there were elements, powerful entities possibly within the government, that knew about the creatures and were potentially using them for darker purposes was both terrifying and enraging. This was no longer just about survival against an alien species. It was also a battle for truth, a fight against the shadows within their own ranks. The helicopter's blades began to whirl, the noise cutting through the somber silence. As Murray boarded, he took one last look at the wounded city. He made a silent vow, not just to protect humanity from the external threats but also to shine a light on the treacherous darkness lurking within. The journey to San Francisco was filled with trepidation. As they approached Alcatraz Island, the infamous prison's silhouette became visible against the backdrop of the setting sun. Its dark history seemed eerily fitting given the looming threat. Murray reached out to the local authorities, warning them of the impending danger. Initial skepticism was quickly replaced with concern as corroborative sightings of the creatures began to pour in. The battle for Alcatraz was about to begin. But Murray had another crucial task. He began gathering evidence, piecing together the jigsaw of deceit that had played a massive role in the recent events. Documents, recordings, testimonies, everything that could expose the traitors within. He knew the dangers of this endeavor. Unmasking powerful entities could cost him his life, but he was undeterred. Truth, he believed, was the most potent weapon against oppression. As night descended on Alcatraz Island, eerie sounds echoed in the distance. The creatures were close, and the next chapter of this harrowing saga was about to unfold. However, amidst the looming darkness, a beacon of hope shone. Humanity was not just fighting for survival, but for its very soul. And as long as there were people like Murray and Dr. Lena, willing to stand up against all odds, there was hope. The sorrowful sunrise of Houston was not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of a fight not just against alien predators but against treachery, deceit, and the shadows within. The battle for truth had just begun. Chapter 10. Island Intrigue. As the last vestiges of day melded into twilight, the notorious silhouette of Alcatraz Island rose menacingly from the waters of San Francisco Bay. Its storied past, filled with tales of crime, punishment, and despair, seemed like mere child's play compared to the terror that was about to descend upon it. Inside a makeshift control center on the mainland, a bank of monitors displayed various parts of the island, surveilled by drones. Murray stood tense, watching the feeds intently, every muscle coiled in anticipation. Beside him, a San Francisco police lieutenant, Danica, said, "We've been receiving reports. Strange occurrences, lights under the water, and people have gone missing around the bay." "It's starting," murmured Murray, more to himself than anyone else. A sudden static interrupted their conversation, and a marine biologist's voice came over the speaker. "We're picking up unusual movements in the marine life around the island. It's like they're fleeing from something." Dr. Lena's voice then came over the comm link from Houston. "Murray, the salinity modifications they made in Houston, I fear they might replicate it here. We need to monitor the water conditions closely." "We're on it," responded Murray, signaling an officer to coordinate with marine teams. The connection between the water's salinity and the creature's aggression had already cost Houston dearly. They couldn't afford to be blindsided again. As the night deepened, more reports came in. Sightings of grotesque figures emerging from the waters, swift shadows snatching unsuspecting victims from the shores, and haunting cries echoing across the bay. Lieutenant Danica turned to Murray, her face etched with concern. "We need to evacuate everyone. The island, the surrounding areas, everything." Murray nodded gravely. "And we need a plan. A trap, like we did in Houston." Hours turned into a frenzy of activity. Alcatraz was transformed into a battleground. Dr. Lena's unique frequency was set up around the island, ready to be activated on Murray's command. Yet, as prepared as they were for a physical onslaught, the psychological warfare was proving more taxing. Every echoing scream, every splash in the water, every shadow that flitted past was a reminder of the unseen terror that lurked beneath. It was during these intense preparations that Murray received a clandestine message, its contents chilling him to the bone. It was evidence, undeniable proof, of government factions having knowledge about the creatures. Worse still, there were indications that they had deliberately exacerbated the attacks for some nefarious endgame. Anger surged within Murray. But this was not the time for reckoning. The imminent threat took precedence. As the night reached its zenith, a high-pitched, almost inaudible sound pierced the air. The frequency. It was time. The waters around Alcatraz roiled and frothed as the creatures, driven mad by the sound, began to surface. They were more grotesque than ever, their amphibious adaptations making them even more formidable. The island was soon swarming with them. But this time, humanity was ready. Floodlights bathed the island in blinding light, and as the creatures recoiled, armed forces moved in, pushing them back, using every weapon in their arsenal. The battle was fierce and unyielding. Every inch of Alcatraz echoed with the sounds of gunfire, screams, roars, and the relentless frequency that blared from speakers. As dawn approached, it seemed the tide was turning in favor of the humans. One by one, the creatures were subdued, captured, or eliminated. But victory, if it could be called that, came at a cost. The ground was littered with the fallen, and the air was thick with grief and exhaustion. Murray, clothes torn and face smeared with dirt and blood, finally allowed himself a moment's respite. The immediate threat had been dealt with. But the war, he knew, was far from over. His communicator buzzed. It was Dr. Lena. Murray. Her voice was urgent. You need to see this. On the screen, satellite images showed large congregations of the creatures at various coastal locations worldwide. They're everywhere, whispered Lieutenant Danica in horror. Murray's face hardened. Then we take the fight to them. Everywhere. As the sun rose, casting Alcatraz in a crimson hue, the true magnitude of the threat became clear. The battle for Alcatraz was just the beginning. The entire world was now a battleground. And as Murray gazed out at the horizon, determination burning in his eyes, a chilling cry echoed from a distant shore, a harbinger of the battles yet to come. The war had only just begun. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.